Welcome to a new episode on the Technomura channel. We really hope you will enjoy watching it and invite you to tell us what you think of it by leaving your reactions below the video. And now, please allow me to present your host, Technomura.
Thank you, Julie, for that energetic introduction. And tonight I present to you a short project which consists of repairing or resurrect, if you prefer, a portable radio of my favorite brand, which is Sony. It's a radio from the 70s. Let's see if there's a date on the radio. No, there isn't. But I'm guessing the radio is from early 70s, so I would say 1971, perhaps. The type is the 7F-74L, and it has, in fact, 4 bands. So the AM, FM, long wave, and short wave, as you can tell for yourselves. Now, this cute little radio, which is in fact an original Sony, one of the early models, transistorized early models from Sony, this radio has taken quite a beating, and I'm sure you can tell. The knobs are broken, the handle is bent, the front panel is cracked in several places, a small part of the bezel seems to be lost. There are some dents and scratches everywhere. Not too much rust though. The radio still has the little battery compartment door. Alright, so I undid the little battery door, just one big screw, and I lifted it out. And already I can see quite a bit of dirt inside the radio and some traces of corrosion. If you look down there inside the battery compartment. But I guess all of that will become truly visible once I open up the back of the radio. So here we go. There are 4 screws and the last one is coming out. Alright, so I ended up just having to lift up the back from the top rather than the bottom. So I lifted it up like this, and then I managed to finally take it away completely by just giving it a little slide backwards and then up. So what do we see here? Well, like I said, there's quite a bit of dirt in there, and there's also quite a bit of corrosion on the battery spring. I think you can just about see the corrosion on the battery contact over there. So yeah, it doesn't look too promising. Also, it's extremely dirty inside. Now, another thing that I did notice is that the ferrite rod antenna is broken. Cleanly broken in the middle, as you can probably see here. So that will need to be repaired, I suppose. But But other than that, what else do I see? Okay, there's a light bulb here floating freely in the air. You can see it down there, over there. Let me see if I can point at it. There. See? So that's a free floating light bulb. We might have to fix that. That is if the light bulb is still functional. Otherwise, well, there's quite a bit of corrosion on the contacts. That too is visible. And what I do notice is that there are quite a few electrolytics as well inside, which will need replacing. Yeah, the electrolytics are of the brand Elna, which is a brand that is quite often used in Sony equipment. Alright. With a little bit of gentle persuasion, with a little bit of unlocking grease and a little bit of heat, and I'm really stressing the word little bit, with a little bit of heat, I managed to make all the knobs release. And I'm in the process now, having removed the top part of the radio and the antenna that was still hanging from it inside. Okay, from the top of the radio, and now I'm in the process of releasing the front cover of the radio. Okay, so this part here. Alright, so I unsoldered two little wires, a black and a white one, you see them hanging over there, from the speaker, and that seems to have solved the problem. So I could pull away the speaker, and on the top of the speaker's magnet is actually a small label with the serial number of the radio, which in this case seems to be 46,012, and there is, I think, oh maybe not, let me see, is there a date code here? Not so sure. I'm not so sure if there is a date code, at least not on the speaker. Okay, so yeah, what can I say? This poor little radio has had quite a lot of damage done to it. You know, yeah, extensive damage. So I'm going to show you what sort of damage I'm talking about. So first of all, if you look at the volume knob and the tuning knob also a little bit maybe, you can see the chassis is quite bent. Okay, so you can see the knob is leaning over to the left of the screen. So yeah, something pretty bad has been going on here with these knobs, and okay, the tuning knob is leaning over a little bit as well, so that's something bad. The ferrite rod antenna I showed you was broken, so that will need fixing. What else? Oh yeah, there is some weird reflective material dropping off of the bezel of the radio, and I haven't quite figured out what its function is and where it comes from, but I suspect this was originally a sort of a light reflector, because there is like a light guide here that goes all around the dial front, and the two lamps, in fact, were stuck to that light guide with some tape. Yeah, this grayish tape you see here by my finger. So yeah, alright, so that's one thing. Let's see. Obviously the knobs were seriously stuck as well. The dial mechanism wire will need to be retreaded as well. So I mean, I will have to put in some fresh thread. Most unfortunate, but yeah. The knobs themselves are damaged, so that will need to be fixed as well. The antenna, let me see, oh yeah, the antenna was originally fixed, you see, up there. Okay, so it had a sort of like a T-shaped piece which was held down by two screws to the front bezel of the radio, so this part right here, and it was screwed in fact to two little plastic studs. You see one of those studs still on the left, although broken and split. I still have the other stud, which is missing here, but I think, at least, I think I have it. Yeah, that will need some repairing as well. Oh yeah, so the reflective material seems to have come from here somewhere on the bezel. Maybe it was hot glued to it or something, but whatever the case this was, I mean, as far as light reflecting surface is concerned, well, it's totally pulverized. It's gone. So I will, yeah, and here are the remnants, by the way. So I will have to find something else to fix that. Also, you can see quite a bit of dirt fell out of the radio. Right. So then I discovered yet another problem, which is that you notice that the front of the radio, I mean at the back of the front side of the cabinet, there are these standoffs. These are pretty long standoffs. I would say about 2 inches long, maybe 2.5 inches or so. But as you notice, you can only see 2 of them. There were actually 4. Now, 2 of those standoffs simply had broken off. Okay, they just were being held up by the chassis, but in fact were meant to be inside the front part of the radio. So one right here, the other right next to the speaker right there. And I do have both standoffs and the plastic bit that broke off. So that will need repairing as well. So yeah, there's, generally speaking, there's an incredible amount of dirt and, pulverizing foam like this, and yeah, it's horrible. There's something very special about this radio that I need to mention. In fact, this radio seems to have a connector at the bottom, and you can see the connector right there. Okay, so Alright, so you notice the metal here is quite a bit corroded, and I think that is from a battery which must have dumped its content on the metal. Now, there is something very, very interesting going on here. So, there is this connector here, right here, and this connector seems to be a sort of a connector into which could be slid some sort of an extension card maybe, or some breakout connector, I don't know. Also, there is a sort of a latch here, and I still haven't figured out what that latch specifically does, although it does seem to power this switch here. Now, I don't know what exactly it does, but my guess is if you inserted a connector into this connector block here, the special connector must have had a pin which pressed against this latch here, which in turn pressed this switch here. Right, come on, focus. So this switch here, okay? So, yeah, in other words, the connector you see here was probably only activated once some sort of special outside connector with some unlocking pin or something like that slid this latch up and therefore unlocked the functions that were made available on this connector. It's very special. I don't know exactly yet what it is, but yes, it's fascinating. I wasn't aware they had made something like that. Alright, so one can see that there has been quite a bit of corrosion on the lower part of the radio. And if you look at the battery holder, well, I think that says it all, doesn't it? As to the source of the corrosion. So yes, fortunately this unscrews with just one tiny screw at the bottom right there. So I'll clean the plastic battery holder separately. But I'm trying to get rid of most of the corrosion, and I managed until now using a very soft brass wire brush. Okay, and that doesn't really damage the metal rather than scrape off any corrosion on the metal. And I'm reasonably successful doing that, although for some reason the corrosion not only attacked the bottom part of the chassis, but apparently it also attacked some other parts. And the hardest part for me to clean out, obviously, is this flat edge connector. Those contacts are copper, and if I clean those, sooner or later the copper will start to oxidate again. So I think it would be sort of a futile exercise to take away the oxidation from the contacts. I think the best I should do with this flat edge connector is to just clean it out thoroughly, and that's it. Also, while I unscrewed it from the chassis, so from these 2 points here, I also noticed that the edge connector is misshapen. You can see here it has a bulge right here. So if I press on both sides, it looks, I believe, the way it should look. But when I let go of it, you can see it bulges out. So I don't know. Is this heat stress damage, or did somebody at some time in the past try to jam something into this connector that wasn't fit for it? I don't know. In any case, this edge connector is not in perfect shape. Alright, I prepped the ground, so to speak. I cleaned as much as I could off of the PCBs and the components and even the chassis, giving the chassis, you could say, a rub down with WD-40 just to prevent it from corroding or rusting. And that worked out pretty good. Okay, you can still see the spots where it was actually corroded, but that's okay. So, what I am going to do, and some might argue that's a futile exercise, but I don't think so. I'm going to replace, actually, the electrolytics in a radio. I would estimate there are perhaps, I'd say roughly 10, yeah, 10 or maybe 12, yeah, maybe a dozen electrolytics inside a radio. And the beauty of it is that most of the electrolytics, if not all of them, are easily reachable. Yeah, so you could say Sony sort of foresaw the fact that the radio might need later on some maintenance, and in fact we're 50 years later. So, and most of the electrolytics are pretty easy to reach without having to unmount the PCBs. Okay, which makes it easy, in a sense, for me to replace them. However, and that really irritates me, and I never quite understood the reason why they did this, they used quite a bit of, I would say, glue to glue the components together. And that really bothers me, okay? That complicates stuff. So what I am going to have to do is to cut that glue loose with a very sharp surgical knife, okay? So something like this. And I'm going to cut loose all the glue as much as I can, in fact. And then I'm going to replace all the electrolytics you see right there. The reason being that I want to eliminate any possible sources of trouble later on. Alright, so I hooked up the radio to my power supply, and I'm running about 4.5 volts DC through it. The same it would get from 3D type batteries it would normally use in the battery bay. And I got it to work, but the sound is really not great. Let me show you. Well, you can tell the sound is quite distorted. So, yeah, there's something not right. And I'm thinking the problem is probably in the amplification stage of the radio, which is all contained on this little print board right here. Alright, so the schematic of the amplification stage, or the end stage of the radio, is there on the screen. And this is what we're up against to try to find a reason why the sound is so distorted. Now, before I start debugging this part of the radio, there is something that I notice on the PCB itself, and it's rather obvious. The resistor you see here is probably one of the problem areas of the radio. So you can see the resistor is badly burned here. Now, strangely enough, it's not open. When I measure it with my multimeter, it measures like a short. Okay, so in any case, this resistor here will need to be replaced. The burnt resistor I showed you, it's R411. Now, unfortunately, the schematic doesn't tell me what value this should be. So I need to look further on and see whether I can discover one way or another what value this resistor has. Is it 1 ohm or is it 1 kilo ohm? Well, I have no idea. So yeah, I need to do some more research, but it's definitely this resistor here which burned. Alright, so here's an interesting observation. While I was testing the output stage of the radio, I could feel that the print board right about here gets very warm, and when I looked underneath, what I actually saw was the output transformer there. Okay, so that one, and that one is getting pretty hot. Also, the power supply says that the radio draws continuously almost 800 milliamps, even when it's not outputting any sound. And that seems a bit high to me. Now, if you look at the schematic, the output transformer is this one right here. Now, it's this one which is running hot. And actually what I believe is that there's way excuse me, these output transistors are conducting way too hard. Yeah. So without even being driven by AC, they still conduct, and they conduct way too much, which sends a lot of current through this output transformer, which of course would explain this resistor that we replaced, you remember, which turns out to be a 1 ohm resistor, to be burned. Okay, so since these two transistors are conducting really hard, there's a lot of current running through this 1 ohm resistor and then through the output transformer's primary, which of course makes it run hot. So this is really interesting. I would almost say that if that's the case, it's possible that this resistor here, which is marked as a 3.3 kilo ohm, might be bad, or possibly this one here, which turns out to be a thermistor. Now, I haven't located it yet, this one, but if this resistor here is off value, way too much off value, that might indeed bias these transistors to such a degree that they conduct way too much current. Okay, so you can see the 3.3 resistor right here, okay, right where I'm pointing at with my finger, right next to this impedance adapting transformer here. Okay, so I will try to dig it out from where it sits and measure it and see whether it's still good. Alright, so you can see it's orange red. Okay, so it's supposed to be a 3.3K. Okay, but I'm measuring 3.6 kilo ohms. So although this resistor, and I did replace it, would warrant replacement, I kind of doubt it would make any sort of real difference to the problem of too much current being drawn through the output transformer, but I did replace it nevertheless with a metal film which measures exactly 3.3. Alright, I think I may have found the smoking gun for the problem I have with the amplifier section of the Sony. Now, you'll recall that I replaced this resistor here, okay, which is a 1 ohm 2 watt resistor right now, yeah, and this resistor is getting pretty hot, which means that either both or one of the transistors is conducting hard and letting through quite a bit of current that then runs through the output transformer, and to be more precise, through the primary of the output transformer. And the transformer gets pretty warm as well as the resistor here. So there's quite a bit of current running through it, and I measured it, and it's around 700 milliamps, which is way too high in my opinion. Okay, so the output transistors are both TO5 transistors, which you see down here in the picture. Okay, and TO5 transistors have a small lip which indicates where the emitter is located. Alright, so I just had a look at the transistors, the way they are put onto the PCB, and I located where the bases of both transistors are. So now, here is the top of the PCB, okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to measure the voltage at the bases of both transistors, okay, and we're connected to the multimeter over there. Alright, so let me show you. So I'm going to switch on the radio now, like that, and you can tell the radio is drawing quite a bit of current. Okay, so right now it's drawing about 730 milliamps. Okay, so which is way too much, of course. Now let me measure the voltage at one base. There you go. Yeah, it's hard to do with just two hands, but okay, so this is the voltage on one base. 30 millivolts. Now here's the voltage on the other base. Way too high, of course. Alright, so I unsoldered the 10 nanofarad capacitor you see here, and it didn't change anything, so the voltage remained high. So I ended up unsoldering the transistor, which was on top of the PCB, which is a 2SB383 from Sony, you know, the one I'm holding in my hand. Now, as luck has it, I do have a stash of old-fashioned transistors in stock, you know, and there you go. I have a whole bunch, in fact, of 2SB 383s. I mean, new old stock, okay? So yeah, I took out one of my replacement 2SB's 383s, and I'm going to mount it in the place of the original one to see if this will make any difference, because I'm beginning to suspect now that this transistor here might perhaps not be good anymore. But instead of mounting it exactly in the same spot as the original one, I'm going to mount the replacement one. I'm just going to tack it on top and see if I can make the end stage of the radio behave normally or not. Alright, I made a little mistake, and I'm going to correct what I said before, but only in one detail. So my reasoning turned out to be correct, and it wasn't the capacitor that was bad, but it was actually the transistor that turned out to be bad. Now, that isn't the mistake I made. The mistake I made was that I measured the voltages not at the bases of the transistors, but at their collectors, okay? And that explains a lot, because I was measuring the voltage that was going through the collector of the bad transistor, and that was about 1.6 volts, while the voltage at the good transistor was only like 30 millivolts. Okay, now if I measure at the same points again, so where I measured 1.6 volts before, I now get 0, or practically. Okay, so yeah, for all intents and purposes I measure 0 volts. So I'm not sending any AC through the end stage, so it's quiescent. So yeah, it doesn't draw any current, and indeed, when you look at the meter, instead of drawing 700 milliamps, it's drawing, well, very, very little, which in fact is what it always should have been. Okay, so I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I measured the voltages at the collectors and not the bases, but it's because, you know, I was watching the transistor top up, while now I'm looking at the transistor bottom down. Yeah. So yeah, you really to pay attention to the orientation of the transistors. Still, I'm glad that my reasoning was valid, only that I measured the voltages at the collectors and not at the bases. Now, just for reference, let me show you what the voltage at the bases is. So, and that is 0 volts, and that is exactly what it should be, 0 volts, or slightly negative maybe, because remember these are PNPs, okay? So to go into conduction, the bases of the transistors basically need to go negative, okay? So yeah, the voltage at the base of the new transistor is 0. Okay. Now let's see what the voltage is at the base of the other transistor, the original one. Exactly the same thing, 0 volts. So yeah, and the voltage at the collector of the good one, let's measure that. Zero volts. At first I thought that the problem might be one of these little capacitors here is shorting out. And if that's the case, of course, then there would be positive voltage running through the shorted capacitor to the base of the transistor. Okay? Now, the strange thing is that when I measured voltages at one of the transistors, while it was quiescent, while the end stage of the radio was quiescent, I still measured some voltage at the collector of one and practically nothing at the other, okay? So the other still showed like 30 millivolts or so at its collector, while the other showed 1.5 volts or even 1.6 volts. Now, that couldn't be right, okay? But that also explained immediately why this resistor here and the end stage transformer were heating up. So one of the transistors was conducting all the time, yeah? And that was not right. So I first unsoldered the little capacitor you see here, and that one turned out to be okay. Yeah, so there was nothing actually wrong with it. So then, in the end, I reasoned, well, if I replaced the other peripheral parts you see here, and they are all new except for the little capacitors you see here, so these three, then and these check out fine, then in the end there can only be one culprit, and the culprit did indeed turn out to be this transistor here. I mounted the replacement transistor instead of the old one, so the 2SB383 here on this side, and I'm going to place back its heatsink. But just for good measure, I put a little bit of heat conductive paste on the inside. Now, it's just a press fit, so the only thing I need to do now is press the heatsink onto the transistor, and that's it. I hate restringing radios. Alright, so I finished retreading the radio, and it works. Let me show you. So if I turn the dial mechanism axle. Yeah, it's a bit hard without the knob, but you can see the dial capacitor moving along with each turn I do on the axle. So yeah, it works, but it's not something I would enjoy doing again anytime soon. Yeah, but the radio works actually. I connected it to an external speaker for the moment. So let's see. So there you go. You hear the radio functions. So the next thing I'm going to do is, the plastic of the radio's cabinet is a bit tired, scratched, and it looks a little bit dull and everything. So what I'm going to try is I'm going to revive, or try to revive, the plastic a little bit to give it back its luster and its shininess and smoothness. And I'm going to use a product I found, which is this. Now, I'm not particularly advertising this product specifically, but it's something which they call a plastic renewer, if I translate it literally. It's actually a product which would melt the surface of any kind of hard plastic to give it back its luster and shine. Now, this is a pretty aggressive and very unhealthy product, okay? So I would advise you, if you were to use something like this, to do it in a well ventilated room or outside. Alright, I need to repair the antenna socket, and for that I need to repair those little studs you see in the corner there. Well, at least one is gone, the other is split. So I'm mixing a batch of epoxy with which to repair it, and I made a little stud out of hard white plastic of something that I had lying around, and I'm going to glue that in the place of the missing stud. I already had a tryout, and it looks like to be the correct height to replace the missing one. Okay, that being said, in the meantime, I gave the inside of the battery cover a treatment with, let's say, something which they call PVC reviver. Let me show you. It's not quite the same one I showed you before. This one is called PVC Cleaner 120. It's also quite poisonous, let me tell you. And I gave the battery cover on the inside a treatment with it, and well, let's say I'm not 100% convinced this is a good result. Let's say it's better than what it was, but there are some streaks visible, and until I find a way to avoid that streaking, I'm not so sure I want to give the outside of the cabinet a treatment with this product. Okay, well, the moment has come to put the whole radio together again. And I tried. I think I really tried. I can say I tried really hard to make the radio presentable again. Let's say to give it some of its former glory back. But let's face it, the radio, as I got it, was pretty badly beaten up. Okay, I mean, here's its case. So I can still do a little bit of cosmetics on it, and still clean it up a little bit more. But yeah, it has had a very, very rough life. Okay, so unfortunately, yeah, the radio as it is past its prime, let's say. Um, so it would be a sort of an exercise in futility, I think, to make this radio look anything else than what it is, except maybe slightly cleaner. So what I'm going to do, well, actually what I did was to try to cosmetically, let's say, repair the most obvious faults and the, let's say, the less attractive sides of the radio. But I don't think I can change the fact that, like I said, the radio has had a very, very rough life, and that includes the dial of the radio, which unfortunately, in a sense, could be said is the face of the radio, but in this radio's case, the dial is, well, let's say, pretty much lost. I mean, it can still be used. I can still put it back into the radio. But, yeah, I mean, no. The dial face will look ugly, I think. So, why do I bother repairing it, and why do I bother putting it back into its original case at all? Well, part of the fun was, you could say, resurrecting the radio, or at least repairing it and giving it a chance to work again the way it was intended to work. But you have to stay realistic. I mean, this radio is not the nicest nor the best radio I have ever had. I mean, it plays okay. It's an okay radio, electronically, mechanically, but is it a good radio? Well, no. I mean, it's average. Okay, it's an average radio. And the problem is, you see, that this particular radio, this specific radio Sony produced, is a bit of a Frankenstein, okay? It was meant to be a car radio, which they also built in such a way that it could be used as a portable radio. Yeah. So, unfortunately for this specific type of radio, it inherited, let's say, both the worst and the best of both types of radio. Yeah. So it's by no means a good marriage, okay, or a good combination. So yeah, it was fun to repair it, and I'm really happy I brought it back to life, and I dare say it works the way it was intended to work. But like I said, I mean, it's not a very rare radio. It's not an exceptionally good radio. I mean, electronically speaking, it's average. So, no, I'm not going to spend more time or effort on trying to make it look any better than it does, because the reality is I'm on a tight budget. Yeah, I can only spend as much time or money on something as I can. Yeah, and unfortunately, this particular radio, even if I wanted to make it look the way it would have looked coming out of the factory, I just don't have the money or the means or even the time to do it. I need to move on. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the radio together again, and maybe I'll show you a few short steps that I'm taking while building it back in. But I think that will be it, and we'll conclude this series with a final view on the radio. Okay, so the speaker is in, and the locking plate is in, that little thing here on one side of the radio. Now, it turns out that this is actually part of a locking mechanism which allowed to literally lock the radio into a specially made sled which was mounted in the car. Okay, the light switch is mounted in, as is the antenna. Okay, so I mounted back the chassis into the cabinet, and I'm about to reconnect the speaker to the chassis and then close the cabinet off with the back lid.
Het zou gaan om een Chinese toerist van rond de 80. Hij ligt in een ziekenhuis in Parijs en is er slecht aan toe. De teller in Europa loopt intussen op en alsmaar meer landen nemen maatregelen. Zo zegt de Britse regering dat alleen noodzakelijke reizen naar China nog kunnen. En de Europese Unie stuurt 2 vliegtuigen naar Wuhan in China, de miljoenenstad waar het virus is uitgebroken. Ze gaan Europese burgers halen die er weg willen. Ook ons land heeft al gezegd dat Belgen die weg willen uit Wuhan of die regio de komende dagen kunnen terugkeren. En nog in Amerika zijn de lichamen van de 9 mensen die zondag zijn omgekomen bij een crash met een helikopter geborgen. Basketballegende Kobe Bryant en zijn dochtertje waren daarbij. 3 lichamen zijn zondag al uit het wrak gehaald, de andere 6 zijn pas later gevonden. De lichamen zijn nu naar het medisch centrum overgebracht voor de officiële identificatie. En in de Champions League basketbal heeft Oostende zich geplaatst voor de 8e finales. Oostende won vanavond met 85-72 van de Spaanse club Manresa. Met nog 1 wedstrijd te spelen is het nu zeker van de top 4 en dus een ticket voor de volgende ronde. De Antwerp Giants verloren in hun groep van het Franse Pau Orthe en ze waren al uitgeschakeld. Moreno de Pauw heeft samen met de Nederlander Wim Stroetinga zijn allerlaatste koers gewonnen. Het duo was de beste in de 6-daagse van Berlijn. De Pauw is pas 28, maar hij hangt zijn fiets dus al aan de haak. En er is vandaag geloot voor de halve finales van het Eurovisie Songfestival in Rotterdam in Nederland. Hooverphonic gaat ons land verdedigen op dinsdag 12 mei tijdens de eerste halve finale. Onder meer Australië, Noorwegen, Israël, Zweden en Ierland zijn er dan ook bij. Op zaterdag 16 mei kennen we de winnaar. Welk nummer Hooverphonic gaat brengen is nog altijd een groot geheim. Het weer vannacht meestal droog, minima van -1 tot 5 graden. Morgen in Vlaanderen kans op een bui, maar meestal droog. In de Ardennen kan het sneeuwen, tot 8 graden. De rest van de week wisselvallig en zacht, rond 10 graden donderdag en tot zelfs 14 graden zondag. Vooraan in dit nieuws informateur.
There you go. It works pretty well now. The amplifier stage of the radio it really belt loudly. So yeah, I'm quite pleased with the radio. But like I said, it looks a bit tired now. It probably has had a very, very rough life. But hey, you know, just like everybody, it carries the scars of life. Now, just a single little detail I just wanted to show you here is that it uses a barrel connector for the power, but contrary to many other appliances who use a barrel connector, the negative is on the center pin of the barrel, so on the inside, and not on the outside. Okay, so if you're going to connect this sort of radio to a power supply, always check the polarity of the barrel connector, okay? So for the Sony 7F-74L, so this radio, the negative needs to be on the inside of the barrel connector. Well, there you go. I hope you enjoyed watching the repair and restoration of this Sony 7F-74L portable car radio from 1970, I think, 7. Maybe 1976. I'll have to look it up. Anyway, cheers and enjoy.